Hello?
Hi, Robert.
Yeah, hi, Maria.
Hi, this is Maria from Spain. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Thank you very much, first of all, for your time. I can imagine you must be very busy, but I really appreciate this because it's a great opportunity for me to talk to you about John, about the diaries. And it's a very, very interesting thing, not very commented about. Not many people talked about. So for me, it's a wonderful opportunity, and I thank you very much for your time.
Well, I'm happy to do it.
Yeah. So let's make a chronology with a story. And you met Fred Seaman at the City College in New York, back in 1973, and you were the publisher of its newspaper, The Observation Post. And Fred started working as assistant of John in January, February, I think, in 79. What kind of task did Fred for John as an assistant?
Yeah, he did everything. He ran errands.
Mhm.
He bought food. He
Mhm.
drove John around in the Mercedes Benz. He
Mhm.
scored drugs.
Mhm.
He looked for houses for them to buy, for John and Yoko to buy. He listened to John when John felt like talking, and Fred even played percussion on the Double Fantasy demo tape.
Mhm. Yes. Wow. And as a friend of yours, did Fred keep you informed on a regular basis about the things going on with John while he was working at the Dakota? He
Yeah,
kept you informed?
on the first day, his first day on the job, he told me that that was what he wanted to do, and we
Mhm.
spoke or saw each other at least once a week, sometimes many times,
Mm.
and he always kept me up to date on what was going on.
And he was happy there, I imagine, because he was not a fan, right?
Pardon me? Well, part of the reason he got the job was because he wasn't a Beatles fan, and
Mhm.
he didn't really,
Important.
he knew who the Beatles were, obviously, but he hadn't really listened that much to the music.
Mhm.
And when he first started working for him, he asked me, all these questions about
Mm.
the Beatles because I had been paying attention to him since 1964, and
Mhm.
wanted to know all this stuff about, who's the walrus and, what's this Paul is it's dead business and, things like that. And I was explaining to him, all the Beatles lore and about the lyrics and just, on and on like that.
Mhm. Yeah. And did John trust Fred? Because I heard you say on another interview that certain things that you read on the diary made you think that John didn't like some aspects of Fred. What kind of
Well,
aspects?
John didn't trust anybody, but
Mm.
he did have a close relationship with Fred, or as close as a Beatle and a personal assistant can be.
Can be.
But there were certain things in the diaries that, I got the impression that Fred occasionally pissed John off, but John was easily pissed off, and I think John suspected that Fred was writing a book.
Mm. Yeah, because he took notes, right? He took
Pardon me?
notes of he Fred took notes. He
Uh,
wrote about
Oh
what
yeah,
was
yeah.
happening.
Fred. Yeah, he kept his own diary. Fred kept his own diary,
Mm.
and I just John was a very aware person, and
Mm.
he just kind of sensed something was going on, but he also he trusted Fred that
Mm.
they were together
Yeah,
a lot.
yeah, yeah. Two
And they
years.
had to be, that kind of a relationship. You have to have trust in the
Mm.
person who's there all the time.
Yeah, oh, yeah, right. When John died, Fred got in touch with you and told you that John asked him to use the diaries to let the world know how the real last years of John Lennon had been in the event of something bad happening. That's what Fred told you, but do you think John ever asked him so? Ever asked him to use the diaries or to use that information?
When I heard it, when Fred told me that 37 years ago, I thought it was true.
Mm.
And, now I think whatever John told Fred, that's how Fred interpreted it. And,
Mm.
certainly that's what Fred told me.
Mm.
I think John did want the real story of his final years to come out, and
Mm.
that's why John was keeping a diary,
Mm.
and that's why he hired a journalist, Fred, as his assistant. And obviously, it would have been John's preference to tell the story himself,
Mm.
and the diaries were a first draft of that story.
Yeah.
I
Mm.
also think it's true that, John told Fred that he sensed his impending doom, and that was hardly a secret. Listen to the song Borrowed Time.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. Very true. So the diaries were given to you on May 89. How many books were given to you?
May 1981. There were 5 volumes, 1975 through 1980. 1976 was a composition book that was inserted into 1975.
Mhm.
And yeah, that was it. There were 5 diaries
5.
covering 6 years.
Yeah. And how was the process of transcription for you? Did How long did it take to you to transcribe it all?
Well, I started messing around with the transcription, and pretty much as soon as Fred gave me the books, I would dip into it, transcribe a little bit here and there that seemed interesting, but it was very difficult. For one
Mm.
thing, it was really hard to read John's handwriting, and he wrote a lot of things in code. For example, when I
Mhm.
first started going through it, I thought O was a reference to Ono, but it was actually
Oh.
a reference to the tarot card reader who he called the Oracle.
Mhm.
And, like I said in the book, it was like
Yes.
translating a foreign language written in a different alphabet. And I
Yeah.
worked on it, on and off for 5 months before I really bore down and did the bulk of the transcription between October 21st, 1981 and November 30th, 1981. And
Mhm.
I was working 16-hour days over that period.
You got to know really John Lennon. I think one in that situation must feel kind of mimetic with him, no? Like you are part of
Yeah,
his life, or he's with him, with you, around you, or kind of a religion or experience.
it did feel that way at the
Yeah.
time, and like as I really got into it, really got into the transcription,
Mm.
it did feel as if I were communicating with John from beyond the
Oh,
grave.
absolutely, absolutely. What kind of things did he write about?
He wrote about everything, what he ate, what he dreamed, when he got up in the morning, when he went to the bathroom, what he watched on TV, when he had sex, how much money he was spending, his relationship with Yoko, his relationship
Mm.
with Sean, what he thought about everybody else, especially Paul, just on and on
Mm.
and on. Everything that happened to him over the course of the day. On many days, it just seemed like a total stream of consciousness that covered the entire day.
Yeah. And what was the most beautiful, tender thing you found on the diaries?
That's a very easy question. His
Yeah.
love for Sean.
Wow, I love that because I love Sean too. Really. He
Okay, that's nice.
wow, great. And the most distressing?
Well, that's a pretty easy question too. His jealousy towards Paul, his love of money, and his obsessions with the occult.
Mm-hmm. So he wrote a lot about Paul.
He wrote about Paul almost, probably as much as anybody else, including Sean, including Yoko. He was just always thinking about Paul.
Mm. No good relation, you mean? Jealousy relation, in his mind at
Just,
least.
what Paul is doing, heard Paul's song on the radio. Paul's
Mm.
music is playing in my head. He thought he had a psychic connection to Paul, that anytime he heard Paul's music in his head, he thought
Mm.
that meant Paul was in town. Um, that kind of thing. And,
Mm.
he was always wondering who's happier, who's richer.
Yeah, that's. I suppose it's kind of normal because they were together since they were kids. And
Yeah,
those,
no, he considered Paul his brother,
yeah, his brother, and
and
those
you
years.
know he said specifically, "I love Paul, but I don't like him."
That's his relationship. it's it's great.
Yeah, in a nutshell.
Yeah. Did John talk about religion too?
Uh, John prayed at least once a year. Sometimes more than that. The only time he actually talked about a particular religion was a brief period. I think it was 1978
Mhm.
when he was born again and found Jesus for about 2 weeks, and
Mhm.
then it just passed.
Yeah. He found Jesus. How?
He found Jesus, and the relationship lasted about 2 weeks. Everything in his diary at that point was, thank you, Jesus. He was
Uh-huh.
always thanking Jesus. So that was really the exception. He
Mm.
wasn't, he was a spiritual person,
Very
but
spiritual.
he didn't really subscribe to any organized religion.
Yeah. And what was his biggest desire?
His biggest desire was that he wanted to have a normal family life and live under one roof with Yoko, Sean,
Mhm.
and Julian, which he knew was probably impossible. And he also wanted to be richer and happier than Paul.
Yeah. He wanted to get closer to Julian, right? Because
He
I've
wanted
also
to,
read.
but
Uh,
it was just very difficult.
yeah, it was a teenager. Julian was teenager and was a complicated um, period of his life. I read that John wanted to get closer to him, but he was always asking for money, and John didn't like that.
Right.
So,
That's
and
what.
they didn't have very much time, so it's very difficult. Hmm. I can
Right.
imagine.
And John was in New York. He couldn't go
Yeah.
back to the UK, and Julian was in the UK, and he would
Hmm.
occasionally come to visit,
Yeah.
but not very often.
Yeah. Very difficult. What was John's most intensive year of writing?
Well, the only year he didn't write very much was 1976, in the months after Sean was born.
Mm. Mhm.
1975 and 1977 through 79 were all
Mhm.
about, yeah, those were equal. And 1980 was, he kind of tailed off, and then when he started working on the
On the
album,
album.
then he almost stopped on Double Fantasy. He almost stopped writing completely. He would just write like off to the studio, and that was the whole day.
Yeah. And now in January 82, Yoko fired Fred. You went on holidays to Jamaica for some weeks in February, and when you came back to your apartment, you discovered that it all had been stolen. Not only John's journals, but also your transcript volumes, which I think it was 16, possibly, or am I wrong? 16 volumes?
Okay. What actually happened was I went to Jamaica for about 2 weeks, and then from there
Hmm.
I went to Bermuda to do some more research
Hmm.
for the book. And
Yeah.
then when I came home, yeah, I found out that everything had been stolen, the transcripts, the diaries. No, Fred did not take my own diaries, the 16 volumes that you were talking about. When I
Mhm.
met with Yoko later that year,
Mhm.
she asked to read them, and I gave them to her. And that's what happened to the 16 volumes.
Oh, uh-huh. And did Yoko knew the diaries were missing from the Dakota before you
She,
alerted her?
no, no, apparently
Hmm.
she found out about that
From
from
you,
me.
yeah, from
Yeah.
the bad stolen things,
I mean, yeah,
from the
that's
bad
a
cassette.
complicated
Hmm.
that that's a complicated story. I had gone to Jan Wenner, the editor of Rolling Stone,
Mhm.
and I told him, and he said that I should tell Yoko, and
Yes.
I eventually did,
Hmm.
and that's how she found out.
Yeah. And it looks like, well, surely you have, you know the news, but looks like the story repeats again because a few weeks ago we could read on the news that Berlin police has recovered about 86 John's personal belongings, including some diaries. that were stolen from Yoko apparently 11 years ago. What did you think when you hear again about those news?
I was amazed that the diaries had been stolen. I didn't know about it until I read the articles in the newspapers.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I just thought after what happened with Fred that, Yoko would have put the diaries in a safe place under
Mm.
lock and key. It's just, hard to believe that the chauffeur
Happened
was
twice.
able to, to steal the diaries. And, I was astonished too that, as I was getting ready to leave for Argentina to
Mm-hmm.
launch a new Spanish edition, that the Spanish media
Mm-hmm.
was quoting the first paragraph of Nowhere Man in the
Mm-hmm.
stories about the diaries. So, it was just all very strange and
Yeah.
astonishing.
Yeah, it is. It is very strange. By the way, going back, sorry. Did Fred give you more items, like clothes or personal belongings, beside the diaries?
Yeah, he had given me a couple of John's T-shirts and scarves
Mm-hmm.
and a few other things. I forget what, but when
Mm.
I met with Ono, I gave them all back.
Uh-huh. And your book, Nowhere Man, has been re-edited now with new content. I think it's 5 new chapters. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, the Spanish edition and the English Kindle edition, they
Mm-hmm.
have new introduction and 5 new chapters.
And what kind of extra content can readers find on this review
Well,
for the people who already have the book?
right. In the new introduction, I talk about many of the things that have happened since the book was first published in
Mm-hmm.
2000. I discuss some of the criticism the book
Mm-hmm.
has received, and I go into a lot more detail about the technique I used to write the book. And then there are excerpts from my own diaries that Yoko still had when the book was first published, and
Yeah.
there's
Mm-hmm.
a few articles I wrote for the magazine Processo, and
Uh-huh.
one of which discusses conspiracy theories. And then there's an open letter to the editor of Playboy about an article that he ran in 1984. And the only purpose of the article in Playboy was to destroy my reputation and
Mm.
prevent me from ever telling the story that I told in Nowhere Man.
Yeah. My copy is on the way. You have to know. I already have the first book, but my copy of the review edition is on the way.
Oh, great, great.
Yeah.
Okay, anyway, you have a good rest of the day. It's already pretty late there where you won't see. Well, no,
Yeah.
7 p.m.
Here is night also. Time for dinner. And you too have a nice rest of the day, and thank you very much for your time. We get
Okay,
in
talk to
touch,
you soon.
okay?
All right. Okay, all right. Have a good
Okay.
one. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.